Okay, today we're going to install a Traveler 1400 lumen off-road LED light with a universal tube clamp light mount, and we're going to put that on a SSR-150 motorbike. So we have the number plate on the front of the motorbike, which we took off. So what we think we're going to do is put a piece of aluminum across these two bolts right here and mount the light right in the center, and then we'll just have to trim off the ends of that piece of aluminum, and hopefully we can notch out the top part of this so that the light will fit in right there. So that's the plan anyhow. So that's what we're going to try and do. All right, let's get started. Okay, that'll probably work. It doesn't look too great. We certainly have to cut off these edges, but that'll do the job. So we're going to put this piece of aluminum on, and we're going to sort of trim off the edges and probably cut down the front side of it so that it doesn't stick out any farther than that. So first thing we need to do is mark these holes from the underside. So let's do that. All right, so there we go. There's where our two holes are right there. Always wear safety glasses. Let's see if this fits. Looks great. Now I just have to make it bigger. If you're drilling through aluminum like this, it helps to actually put some WD-40 on it to lubricate it a little bit, and the drill will work easier. All right, so let's see, does the screw fit through here? The screw barely fits. So what we can do is just loosen that hole up just a little bit. Now we don't want the screw to be too free moving. That's about right. All right. So let's put this right here. See if the screw will fit in this hole. Perfect. All right. So that one's in place. Let's try the other one over here. Perfect. All right, so now, since I know that we're going to remove a lot of this material, what I'm going to do is put this plate underneath here, put the screw through, line up the plate on both sides. I'm going to mark the outside edge of this, and it doesn't have to be exact. What we're going to do is just cut off all this extra material out here because we don't need it. We just need at least this much space between the bolt and the outside edge. So I'm just going to mark these just like this. So now okay. So we really only need this piece along in here. just like that. That's really all we need. What's along in there, and the rest of this we can cut off. Okay, so I'm glad I stopped for a minute before I cut this. I was going to actually cut along this line and cut off all this other material that I thought we didn't need. And here's the problem that I didn't think about, and I saw it at the last minute. So here's the light. This light's sort of bulky. Okay, and here's the problem. The problem is this light has to mount on this piece of aluminum, just like this, and it can't mount that far back because the light would butt up against the front of the bike. So when we put the aluminum on, let me move you closer where you can see. Put the piece of aluminum on, the light, and this cord has to go behind this. The light's actually going to be sitting on the front of this piece of aluminum. So what I'm going to have to do is just cut it along this line and along this line and leave this entire piece of aluminum. So let's do that. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to cut off the unneeded portion of the material on both sides of this thing with a grinder. So let's grip it down. Let's mark our line right here. And you know, this doesn't have to be exact. I'm trying to be pretty careful with it, but it really doesn't have to be exact. All right, so there we go. Let's pick it up. And then let's go over here, see how it looks on the bike. So, it's still really hot. This has to go on just like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off these two front edges, because really what we need is the piece right along in here that the light is going to bolt onto. All right, let's cut off the edges of this just to try and get this point reduced as much as possible. Let's cut it off about like this. There we go. And over here, about like this. Our light is going to go, I hope you can see it, our light's going to go somewhere around in here. So as long as we don't mess with this area, we're good. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that's a pretty sorry cut. And it is really. But I don't really care how bad the cut looks, because nobody's ever going to see this piece. That's really hot. This piece is going to be hidden behind the number plate that goes on the bike. So I don't really care. As long as there's no jagged edges that should cut someone or could cut somebody, I don't really care. So I'm going to mount this back on the bike. Then we're going to line up the place to put the light. So let's go do that. Okay, so I took the piece of metal and I got it mounted on here. So now we have to put the light on. So to get the light to line up, I'm going to have to take these screws out on both sides, take this bracket off and line it up on the piece of metal. So let's do that. I know this looks pretty rough. It's not at all symmetric. My son came out and was giving me a hard time about it, but nobody will ever see this, so it really doesn't matter what it looks like. All right, so that's where the light has to go. So let's work on that. Okay, so it's now the next day. My son gave me a hard time about the angles on this not being symmetric and how it not being nice and pretty. And so I went a couple of places in town trying to find another piece of aluminum. Nobody had any aluminum this size in stock, and it's a fairly common size, so I'm surprised. So anyhow, we compromised. I told him that I would trim off this edge, try and make it a little bit more symmetric and clean it up a little bit, and then all right, I think that's good enough. It's still not perfect, but I think it'll do the job. The main thing is you want to have a nice rigid piece of metal. Doesn't really matter what the angles look like. Again, nobody's ever going to see it. So let's stick it on the bike. Okay, so what the package doesn't tell you is to get the bolt through this bracket, and you have to put the bolt in here before you mount it, because once you put it on the bike, it's just almost impossible to get this through. In fact, I'd say it is impossible unless you re-drill this hole, which I didn't want to do. So we had to take this bracket off, and to do that, you had to remove these outside screws. Well, you see these little nuts right in here? It's just about impossible to get those nuts lined up right. It took us about 15 minutes to get them lined up. So now that they're in, once they're in, they actually wedge themselves in place, and you can use the Allen wrench that comes with it to tighten it down. So we're going to tighten it pretty close to its final position on both sides. And then we'll tighten it once we get it on the bike. So now let's go over to the bike and finish tightening this thing down. Okay, so we're just about ready to mount the light onto the bike, and it's going to go on just like that. But we have to connect up to a switch that hooks up to the battery. So the light had this thing on it, which we don't need. We're not going to use it for any reason. This looks like it's really made for an automotive application. We're just going to connect our red and our black wires up to a switch, and we're going to mount the switch right here on the bike handle. So what we need to do is go ahead and put the light on, put it in position, and get ready to hook the switch up. So we cut that big plug off. Let's feed our wire down through here. And most of this wire we're not going to need. We're only going to need about maybe 10-12 inches. We have the bracket on the light. Let's put it down through this hole. And hey, that looks pretty good. All right, let's put our bolt and our washer on. Okay, back the next day. So we got the light mounted. It looks pretty good. I think once we put the front panel on, where the number goes, it'll look really good. We've been trying to figure out where to mount the switch. I thought that I could go to one of the local cycle shops and buy a switch that mounts like this or this onto the handlebar. but I can't. The reason why is this is a Chinese bike, so this handlebar is not the same size as a handlebar would be on a Honda or a Yamaha or a Suzuki, which is what all the local cycle shops sell. SSR, this is an SSR bike, and SSR is a Chinese brand, and it just doesn't fit. Even though some of these switches are adjustable, they still, the switches they had available still would not clamp correctly on this handlebar. So we've been trying to figure out where to put the switch, and we could mount it on here, or we could you know, make a custom mount for it, sort of like that. There's a number of different things we could do, but we need to mount it somewhere. So we thought about it a little bit and decided that actually, you see how the key switch is right here? Well, we can make a mount that goes underneath this bolt that'll put the light switch right here, where it won't really be in the way of the rider. It won't interfere with any of the hand controls. It'll just be like the key switch. It'll be off to the side. When you need it, you can just flip it on or off right there. And this is the wire. We'll just run the wire underneath the handlebar up to the key switch and then to the battery, which is under here. So here's the switch right here. So the switch will sit somewhere right along in here. All right, so what I needed to do is figure out how wide to make that. So I've got the caliper here, and if I get a piece of metal that's about at least 1.2 inches wide, that sticks out maybe 2 inches from this way from that bolt, then I think we'll be in good shape. And I need something big enough so that I can cut a hole in it to mount the switch in. So I found this piece of metal, and I think what I'm going to do is just cut it and make a mount out of that. So let's get started. Okay, so I know that the piece of metal has to be roughly 1.2 inches wide. I got this piece. I'm going to cut it at least 2 inches long. So let's measure that. And you know what? Let's just make it 2.5 inches. I can actually cut it longer if I need to. Cut it out to about there. And, 2 inches wide. Actually, it's 1.2 inches. Let's just make it 1.5 inches. So we'll go about right to there. Okay. And this doesn't have to be precise. It's going to be fairly close, but not just perfect. Once I get it cut and I get it put on, I'll actually go back and probably trim it a little bit. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to be off frame for a second. I'm going to just look at the bike and make sure that. So I'm going to cut this out, and then once we get it on the bike, we're going to have to drill a hole for the nut on the handlebar and for the switch to go in. And I'll come back and trim this to fit. I'll fine tune it once I get it put on. So let's go ahead and get that cut. So, oh yeah, and I forgot to mention earlier, whenever I'm using this grinder, I always try and wear headphones. Sometimes I forget, but yeah, it'll help with the ringing in your ears if you'll wear headphones. And of course, always wear safety glasses. Okay, so this piece of metal is going to go just like that underneath that bolt. Hope you can see it. Just like that. So what I'm going to do is cut off the, I'm going to round off the 4 corners and then get the holes drilled, get it put on the bike. So here we go. Okay, so let's go measure the bolt on the bike so we know what size we have to cut the hole in the piece of steel. So let's see, that is about 0.3, so we'll make it about 0.35. All right. Okay, so we needed a hole that's about 0.3, so I'm going to use a drill bit that's about 0.36, but whenever I'm drilling a hole that's this big, I always use a starter bit, something small where I can be more precise. A bit like this, as you can see, I tried to drill it a minute ago, and the large bit will sort of walk around on the surface, especially if your surface is not flush. So what I'll do is start with a little bit smaller bit where I can be a little bit more precise. If you're drilling steel, helps to put a little bit of WD-40 on it. A little lubrication makes it drill easier. A guy told me the other day he thought WD-40 would catch on fire doing this. I said, no, it won't. You're not going to catch on fire. All right, there we go. It's not perfect. It's not in the exact center, but it's close enough. This is a piece of steel, so it's fairly strong. All right, so now we need to cut the hole for the switch to go in. The switch is about, how wide is this sucker? About 0.45, so I'm going to give it a hole that's about ½ an inch. So let me swap drill bits. I'll be right back. Okay, so let's drill the bigger hole, or the switch hole. So actually, let's stop for just a second. So the switch is going to have to be right. You probably can't see. My shop lights aren't that great. Switch is going to have to be somewhere right around here. All right. there we go. Now let's see if the switch will fit through there. Where's my switch? There it is. So the switch has to come through just like that. Perfect fit. All right, now let's get it mounted on the bike. Okay, let's get this thing mounted on the bike. So we're gonna have to loosen the handlebar up first. And I want to say something while I'm loosening this up. If this handlebar comes loose while somebody's riding the bike, it's going to be a disaster. So we have to be really careful hooking this thing back up to make sure that it's really tight. You know, I've seen a lot of do-it-yourselfers on YouTube that do a lot of stuff and they take a lot of things apart. And it always sort of scares me when they put them back together. Some of them are careful, some are not careful, but you know, with a motorbike, especially when you're loosening the bolt that holds the handlebar, you can't be too careful. Oh yeah, let me make a point too before I hook this thing back up. I don't know if you can see the ridges on the end of this. This is sort of a cheap excuse for a lock washer. They really should have put a lock washer under this. The ridges are supposed to keep this from unscrewing, and generally it works good, but you know, I don't trust that in a stressful environment, an environment where there's a lot of stress on this bolt or this nut. So I'm going to go and find a lock washer to put on this, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. I found a lock washer. So we're going to put the bracket on. We're going to put a lock washer between the nut and the bottom of the bracket just to make sure this thing is on, this nut's on pretty tight, because we don't want this nut coming off while somebody's riding the bike. That would be bad. All right, so let's tighten this up. After we get it tightened up, I'll show you what it looks like when it's on here. Come on, get in there. That's really tight. I think that'll stay. So now, that's what it looks like when it's on there. So let's stick the switch in, take a look and see what that looks like. All right, so the switch is gonna go right there. All right, so before I plug the switch in, we're gonna put some electrical contacts on, hook it into the battery. So let me get this stuff together and be right back. Okay, so let's cut the wire. So again, the switch is going to go right here. Okay, so right there. So the wire has to come up here, and we're just going to run power through the switch. We're not going to run ground. Ground's going to go directly to the battery. So I've got to clip the wire here, put a couple of these little connectors on it. Actually, these are the wrong one. I need these connectors. 2 of these on it. Hook the power line coming from the light into one side of the switch. The red line going to the battery goes to the other side of the switch, and then ground is going to go straight. So I'm going to cut this cord open right here, just enough to pull the red line out, and then we're going to solder these connectors onto the red line. You crimp them and solder them both. And let's do it. Okay, so I got the shielding on this piece of cable cut open. Cut my finger in the process. That's inevitable, always happens. But I've exposed the red wire, so we're going to clip the red wire here, put these on it, solder them in place, hook them up to the switch. So let's do that. All right, this is a crimping tool. You see it's got yellow, blue, and red dots. You put the yellow connector in just like that. And this tool is pretty cool, so that when you start crimping you can let go and it'll stay together. The wire won't come out. All right, so let's do the bottom one first. And actually, I want to do it like this because I want the open side of that connector facing up so I can solder it. All right, and then this one. Okay, connector's on. Now I want to make a point. A lot of people just crimp this on and leave it like that. I don't do it because these connectors, if you don't crimp it just right, they will come off. So I usually crimp it in place, and then I take my soldering iron and I put a little solder on it just to make sure it's good to go. So I'm going to do that and I'll be right back. So while that's cooling, let me show you something else. So any wire you're going to run along a chassis is going to get really hot against the engine. So what you do is you put it in a wire conduit like this. So from the point it hooks up to the switch all the way to the battery, it's going to have to go through this conduit. So I'm going to do that off camera. That's going to take 10 minutes and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got the cable pulled through the chassis, and I didn't make a video of that because it was a major pain in the butt. I taped up the end of the cable, so now what we have to do is we have to put some terminals on the end of the cable and plug it onto the battery terminals. So let me do that and I'll be right back. Okay, let's solder these connectors and get this puppy finished up. That wonderful sound you hear in the background is my son mowing the grass next door. I love that sound. That means I don't have to give him money. Let the kid earn his own money. That's a pretty sorry soldering job. There we go. That's better. These connectors, I noticed I bought them before. The solder does not flow to them very well. I don't know what very good, I guess I should say. I don't know what the problem is. I've got my soldering iron on the hottest setting, so it should flow straight onto them with no problem. But I noticed it puddles up and it won't flow properly. I bought these because these are actually heat shrink connectors. The yellow stuff is heat shrink, so if you get it hot it's supposed to shrink up around the wire. I don't think I'll buy them anymore. I can manually heat shrink what I need if I can have a connector that solder will flow to properly. So alright, both those are good, so let's hook it up. Always blow it cool if you do this. Don't burn your finger. I've done it many times. There we go. Hope you can see that. So you can actually heat these up and this will shrink around the wire. That's what I was trying to say. Now the covers will not go perfectly back around the battery, but that's okay. All right, so let's hook up the switch now and see if the lights come on. Let me adjust my camera just a little bit. There we go. Bring you around some. I hope you can see this. Okay, so let's tighten the switch up a little bit. I'm going to actually reorient the switch just a little bit, but for now I'm just going to tighten it up enough. All right, that's good and tight. Okay, so let's hook these guys up. One goes there. Well, switch is on. One goes there. Come on, get on there. There we go. All right, so let's put a little bit more oomph into it. There we go. All right. So the switch is wired in. Let's see if it works. And there you go. Battery's on. I mean, the light's on. Now I'm going to make a point. This type motorbike has an alternator that will charge up the battery while it's running, but it's not a great alternator, okay? So these lights are going to really use a lot of energy. They're going to pull a lot of amps off the battery. So you only want to use them. I'm saying this like you're here with me. We're only going to use these after dark, and we're not going to use them for a long period of time because this battery, these Chinese motorbikes come with a real cheap battery, and the battery is capable of cranking the motorbike and not much more. But once you have the motorbike cranked, you can turn the lights on, and the alternator will provide enough energy to keep the battery power level up high enough to run the lights. So anyhow, that's it. Everything's hooked up. It's ready to go. I want to say one more thing. One of the reasons we were trying to find the switches that go on the handlebar here is because if you're riding the bike, everything on the bike is designed so that you can operate it with your thumb. Notice on both sides there's these switches. So you can pull a brake with your hand, operate a switch with your thumb. At no time should you have to pull your hands off the bike until you get ready to turn it off. So that's why we wanted to mount the light switch up here, so hopefully my son could just reach over here and flip the switch. Well, that didn't work. So the switch is in place, and I told him if he's going to run the lights, you need to pull over. Don't turn the bike off, just pull over or stop for a moment, turn it on, and then get going again. So anyhow, everything's back in place. It's not the best fabrication and wiring job I've ever done, but it'll do okay for now. No, we're not going to keep this bike a long time, and whoever buys it, I'll explain to them that, you know, we did this aftermarket lighting job, and you know, we're gonna tell them everything. So if they want to take the lights off, they can. But for now, it's on and it works. Okay, this is what the bike looks like with the front plate back on. Came out pretty good, I think. Yeah, it looks all right. That's it.